We breaking bread, yeah. We breaking bread, yeah. We breaking bread, yeah. One conversation at a time. We breaking bread, yeah. We breaking bread, yeah. We breaking bread, yeah. One conversation at a time.
The Breaking Bread Village.
One conversation at a time.
The Breaking Bread Village.
One conversation at a time.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Breaking Bread Village. So I am here today. We're going to speak about some myths, some truths, and some misconceptions in regards to human trafficking. Human trafficking has been a huge topic here lately, but it's something that's been happening since the beginning of time. So this is not a new concept or a new injustice. This has been going on for a long time. It's just like for right now, it seems as though the veil has been lifted on a lot of things, and a lot of people are being exposed in regards to several things that are fall underneath that umbrella. So we are waiting for Officer Hannah to arrive. She had an emergency warrant to give out. I mean, she's a police officer, so her life is a little bit unpredictable at times. So we are just going to wait for a few minutes. She said she should be on here in a few here. So we're going to wait. She's on her way back to the office, so she'll be on here with us. So I'll be right back. All right, thanks. Hey guys, just want to let you guys know I'm still here. She should be on in a few minutes, so I'm sorry about the delay. We will start her shortly. Thank you. Okay, guys, we are coming on, I promise. Officer Hannah is setting up her computer. She had to rush back to the office. She was out in the field, so she will be on here shortly. She is getting everything geared up. So I apologize for the delay. She should be on shortly. Thanks. Hey, uh-oh.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, oh my gosh. Well, his computer literally just turned on. If you want, I can try to do it from the computer here.
Okay, if you think that's better for you.
Well, I'm just afraid, like this last time, it went out on the audio. I'm so sorry. It was an emergency warrant last minute and on my case, and oh my goodness.
No. Just relax. It's okay. We are going to have this conversation.
Yeah, one way or another. Oh
yes.
gosh, what's gonna happen? Yeah.
Yes.
FXA 29 QM3 PF. Okay.
It's just the way it is sometimes, Life just kind of works how it wants to.
It is crazy sometimes, but all right, let's see if I can get it to connect to the internet. Well, we might.
You seem to be coming through pretty well on your phone.
Okay. Well, if the phone is working, yeah, I don't know. I had to grab his laptop is the only one in the office that has a camera. And so, because my laptop I was going to use, of course, is at home because I wasn't planning on doing this, from here. Hold on. I think I just.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm going to give him shit for this because I've never seen such a slow computer in my life. So I actually thought about trying to turn it on as I was driving to get it warmed up, but.
Sometimes this is life, man.
Yeah.
This is life.
Tonight and everything last night?
Oh, everything was great. It was a beautiful evening. I had a bit of I had a migraine yesterday, actually, when we met up. So it was kind of a blessing in disguise because I was not feeling well, but I was going to push through because I was so excited about having this conversation. And I get migraines sometimes. And it's just the way it is. So
yeah. Okay. Well, it's finally. I think, letting me in, but it's not. Wait, here we go. Oh, here we go. Okay.
Oh, looks like we have you here. Let's take you off here. Can you hear me still?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Awesome.
This will be better. Okay. Woo.
Awesome. Well, now we can breathe. We can breathe a little bit, taking a little bit of air, relax, so we can have this conversation.
This is good. No, I've been looking forward to this. I am so glad that we can do this.
Yes. So you know what? Sometimes obstacles get in our way, but when we are persistent, as I am, we make it through. So I want you to go ahead and introduce yourself. And we're going to start this over from yesterday. Please introduce yourself to us and kind of give a little bit of your background.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
You got it.
All right. Sounds good. Well, hi, guys. My name is Hannah Mavard. I'm with the Fort Worth Police Department in the Human Trafficking Unit. And I've been in the Fort Worth PD for about 5.5 years. And I've been in the Human Trafficking Unit for almost 4 now. So prior to working in law enforcement, I actually was in nonprofits. I actually was a horse trainer. I was trained horses.
Really?
Yeah, I trained horses full time.
Wow.
And I loved it. I still do. But I was also really interested in social justice. And I thought, what is like the worst crime I could think of? And for me, it was human trafficking. And all I could think of was that if I was being trafficked, I would want someone to come to me.
Sure.
And so I didn't really know how to get started. So I thought, well, nonprofits probably a good start. So I started working for a nonprofit, did a little bit in Minnesota, moved to Florida, worked for one in Florida, then moved to Louisiana, worked for one in Louisiana for just a minute. And then the people in Louisiana were police officers. And I loved what they did. I loved their hearts for helping people. And I want to do, and I want to work human trafficking from like a law enforcement perspective. I want to work investigation. I want to find the bad guy. I want to put him away. And so it's a long story, but Fort Worth had a human trafficking unit at the time, and so I applied to Fort Worth and I got in. And I worked patrol and did my time, and then eventually transferred over to our unit full time.
Awesome. Well, that's definitely a background. It's interesting how you say you started a nonprofit. Most people that I know who work in nonprofit do it from their heart. You know, I mean, they love it. I work for a nonprofit. I do a lot of stuff with a nonprofit, so I get it. And, you know, just to tell you a little bit about my passion in it, you know, I've always been a person that kind of fought for the underdog. I fight for people who I feel like are being taken advantage of or preyed upon or, you know, just misused and, you know, just all of that. And I've always had a passion for it. Like I was telling you yesterday, you know, I am one of those people. I watch Law and Order. I watch, you know, the ID channel. I watch all of that. And you know, and I told you, you know, everybody's everybody's a little suspicious to me. You know, I kind of give everybody a side eye because, like I was telling you, you know, you always see on the news shows or on these different documentaries where it's like, you know, they say, oh, well, that person was the deacon of church or he was so nice or everybody knew him in the neighborhood. And then they find out he has like 6 women in his basement, you know? So, I never say anybody is just like, you know, exempt.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's get to it. You know, again, I just want to ask you if you can explain how human trafficking is comprised of labor, sex, trafficking. If you can kind of explain that for me.
Absolutely. So the human trafficking is the broad term. And underneath human trafficking, there's kind of some subsets. So you have sex trafficking and you have labor trafficking. Overseas, sometimes they also include in that organ trafficking and forced marriages. But that's some stuff that's more based on overseas laws. And I'm not an overseas international expert. I have some other friends who are, and I trust them, but I don't work international cases at the moment, so I don't want to speak for that and say anything wrong. What I am focused on is, of course, trafficking in the United States. I'm, of course, in Texas, but it looks very, very similar no matter where in the U.S. you are. So human trafficking, again, is your broad term. Underneath it, you have sex trafficking, and then you have labor trafficking.
Okay.
So labor trafficking is a little bit simpler. It's any person, adult or child, that is forced into any kind of forced labor by something we call force or fraud or coercion. So force is kind of what people usually think of with trafficking. It's like, you know, they're going to be getting beaten, or they're with sex trafficking, maybe it's sexual assault, or it's being hurt or some way, you know, it's force. Fraud is a little more subtle. It's going to be a lot of your false promises. So it's something like you're going to be rich, or you know, you're going to have a great job, or I'm going to get you legal status, or you know, you'll be a model, or you're going to have your own business, or any sort of number of false promises.
Okay.
Coercion is going to be a lot of your threats. So if you outcry, I'm going to call the police. You're going to go to jail. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your family. I'm going to hold on to your ID or your documents or your social security card or your visa. So there's all three elements, and any one of those can constitute human trafficking. And so you don't have to have force necessarily. Someone doesn't have to be beaten or physically hurt to be in trafficking. It just has to be of a sort of a fraud or something that is of a sufficient nature to make a reasonable person feel like they weren't free to leave, or they were forced to do something they didn't want to do.
Okay.
So labor trafficking, so to back up, labor trafficking is any adult or child that is put into some kind of labor via force or fraud or coercion. And so what we see in the United States is a lot of restaurant workers, farm workers, especially like in Florida,
Yeah.
cleaning services, domestic servants. Oh man, it could be anything. Nail salons. Those are some of the most common ones we see, but farm workers and restaurant workers are some of the most common.
So are you saying, and I'm making an assumption here, but are you saying that that in particular, what you're speaking of, happens to more people who are like immigrants?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Just based on the businesses you named.
Yeah, exactly. So sex trafficking in the United States actually is composed primarily of American women, women from the United States being trafficked in the United States. While there are certainly Americans who are labor trafficked, it does tend to be a little more common that they are illegal immigrants, or they're not even illegal, but they are immigrants and they just don't understand like the laws and the rights that they might have here. Because ironically, sometimes people who are labor trafficked actually have it better being trafficked in the U.S. than they did in their home country. And so they have sometimes not really much of a reason to outcry. They're like, well, this is kind of miserable, but like, it's not as bad as it was. And
which is so sad.
It's
oh my goodness. Yeah. But
yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. And especially ones that are undocumented, they'll often feel like, of course, they can't outcry. There's, they know they didn't come here or legally, so they feel like they have no rights. Well, that's actually not true. If you're trafficked, your legal status doesn't matter. And you can get a visa to stay. It's called a T visa. And it's specifically for any undocumented immigrant that has been trafficked. So they don't get deported. There's tons of help for them. But of course, we don't.
Yeah, and so I want to ask you about that because of course, immigration has been a big conversation in the last couple of years. I mean, we've always talked about immigration, but it's been really a focal point here lately. For a lot of people that are Americans that make this outcry that they're here illegally deported. Some of those people that you're speaking of could be people that have been brought in, illegally, and because I've heard that, and then people say, "Oh, people aren't being trafficked," they're not being brought in. And it's like, well, that it is a thing. It's definitely a thing.
It's a thing. So there is a difference between smuggling and trafficking. So smuggling, and a lot of people get this very confused because it is a little confusing. So smuggling is going to be a crime against a border. So that is when someone crosses the border illegally, but they did it voluntarily. So they paid someone, I think the going rate right now is about $7,000, depending on where you're from, is to pay a smuggler a certain amount of money, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, whatever it is. And then you're smuggled across the border. So it's a voluntary business relationship, even though it's illegal. And that's not trafficking. That has nothing to do with trafficking. People crossing the border illegally are not necessarily being trafficked. But what it does do is it tends to make them very vulnerable to trafficking. Because they are illegal, they don't feel like they have any rights. They don't know what their rights might be, even if they felt like they had them. And they're very vulnerable to their smugglers, to having to pay off that debt. Because who has $10,000? I mean, a lot of Americans don't even have $10,000,
Just on hand, yeah.
All they had was what was on their back. They agreed to pay $10,000 that they don't have. So now they come to the U.S., and the smuggler is like, okay, well, you still owe me $10,000 or 20 or whatever it is. So you can work that off for me in this strip club, ranch, in this maid service. And then, but of course, they don't want to lose their worker. So they would do something called debt bondage. So the worker is with them. Maybe they're technically free to leave. They're like, you can leave at any time, but you owe me $10,000 and your rent is $1,000 a month and your food is $500 a month. And your toilet paper is $50 a month, and whatever
that they can't afford.
Yeah, and so the debt cycle continues. So they actually continually get more in debt, not less.
And I watch. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Well, I watched a documentary the other day, and they were talking about that, how they were in that situation, but the people, I guess they call them coyotes, had their wife and children somewhere else, still in Mexico. So they also felt a need to still, work for them because they kept threatening that we have your wife and daughter.
you're 100% correct. That happens a lot. There's a lot of familial loyalty, and of course, there would be. It's very positive, and they want to protect their family who's back there. Or sometimes they're allowed to send money back, and maybe it isn't much. Maybe it's $50 a month or $100 a month. Well, in another country, that might actually be all that's keeping that family alive.
Sure.
So they're being trafficked. It's a bad situation, but they still feel like it's the best option for what they've got.
And you know what? And yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I get so excited about this.
Why they don't usually outcry.
Right.
The hallmark of trafficking victims is that they don't believe they're victims. It's very, very, very rare to find any victim who will actually outcry and ask for help. Whether that's labor trafficking or sex trafficking. We haven't even touched sex trafficking. But
yeah, I have a couple questions about that. You know, and the thing was so interesting as we talk about parts of immigration is that a lot of U.S. companies, a lot of U.S. farms, a lot of U.S. Industrial companies, they know exactly that what's going on. They know they're illegal. They know a lot of this stuff, and they employ them because, quite frankly, it's jobs that we don't want to do. I mean, it's just we don't want to pick lemons, and and I'm not trying to be
no, I get it. Yeah.
racist or anything, but it's the truth. I mean, this is just when you watch these shows that touch on this information, they have people that are from these different countries that say this. We do jobs, farms on the fruit farms that people in America don't want to do for little to nothing.
Yep, exactly. And they'll often certain businesses will send recruiters to small villages in other countries and be like,
Really?
hey, you can come to America, you'll make such and such amount of money, we'll pay for your way, we'll get you a visa, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes families will send maybe their son or their kid, like, go to America, get a better life, send us money back, blah, blah, blah. And so they're willing, and it's not like they're being kidnapped into trafficking. That's another big misconception. Almost no one in the U.S. is kidnapped into human trafficking, and they're willing. And so again, that's another obstacle to them for outcrying, because they're like, well, I chose this. Like, I came here. Like, even if it sucks, it's my fault, which it isn't. Right? It isn't their fault at all. But they feel like it is.
So they've been manipulated.
Yeah, extremely manipulated. Yeah.
Okay, I have another. Well, this is good because, sensory lights.
There's not enough people in the office anymore. So
yes, I used to work in an office like that. You'd be sitting there working, and it just goes pitch black. No, I get it. So I want to touch on another myth that we have. The human trafficking is a global issue, and there's nothing I can do to help. Touch on that for me. What's the myth about that?
Yeah, and that's a myth. I mean, it certainly is a global issue, but it's just as much of a domestic and a local issue as it is anything else. And there's people, especially for sex trafficking. Sex trafficking has been a lot of misconceptions lately, and I want to say something about kind of caveat, like, it is everywhere. Sex trafficking is in every state. I would say in every town and almost every hotel, but it's not what we think necessarily. There's a lot of things going on right now, Wayfair and big conspiracy theories and people getting kidnapped into trafficking and the movie Taken and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I mean, it's a good movie. It's not accurate for domestic sex trafficking. So sex trafficking is similar to labor trafficking in that for adults, it requires force, fraud, or coercion. And the adult is in the sex industry in some way, the commercial sex industry, usually prostitution, but sometimes production of pornography and some other things can kind of fall under that. But usually it's considered prostitution. And it's any adult that is put into that by or by force, fraud, or coercion. So it can be something significant, like there is a woman and she's beaten if she doesn't have sex for money, and it's very obvious, and she's beaten and all this stuff. Or it could be something as small as a husband telling his wife to have sex for drugs, or he'll put naked pictures on Facebook, right? And so again, that's the commercial sex act, and she was threatened or coerced into doing it. And so it could have just
been about that part of it. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it can be very, I want to say minor because it's all bad, right? But it can be very subtle within a family or a single relationship, one time, one act, one act of coercion or a threat.
Okay.
promise, or it can be on the other side, really major, and someone's been trafficked all over the US in hotel rooms for years, right? And so like, human trafficking is so broad
Yeah.
that you have to kind of define what you're talking about and what section of human trafficking to really be able to get on the same page.
See, and I didn't really think about that because that is, bro. I mean, I didn't even think about the part about the husband. But I mean, you see that all the time, especially when you watch the show Intervention. I watch Intervention. When you watch show Intervention, you see that where a husband or a wife, does that where they make them do things to be able to get drugs. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and it's even more broad for children. So sex trafficking of a minor the Texas statute is so broad that actually almost every sexual assault of a child or pornography of a child, or the pictures, naked pictures of a child, production of porn or anything, is actually considered trafficking. So almost everything can be prosecuted under human trafficking, the way that the statute is written. Having said that, we don't usually do it that way. Usually we keep it to commercial sex of a minor. But minors cannot consent, which it means force, fraud, and coercion are not required. That means any minor, so any child under the age of 18, so any 17-year-old and under, if they participate in any sort of commercial sex, even if there's not a pimp, even if they're voluntarily doing it on their own, that's considered child sex trafficking.
Wow.
So, for example, let's say you have a 17-year-old and she has sex or gives like oral sex or blowjob for marijuana, for some weed. We see this all the time. That's actually sex trafficking because that was a commercial sex act. She was under the age of 18, and that's all that you need to prove sex trafficking.
So this is, and I'm not laughing at that. I'm just saying this is really interesting to me because this is how when you see, when I watch my court shows, when you see this and you see like the real court shows, this is how they're able to put so many charges on people because it's so many different. They take a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and be able to compound all these charges. So that's it. I never thought about that as in regards to trafficking.
Yeah. So the thing is with penal code, and this is what we have to prove, in the courts and for us in our cases, like a lot of the offenses actually overlap. And so you can kind of prosecute things under different offenses. And so you talk to your attorneys, you talk to your DAs, and you try to figure out what's going to be the best charge, what's the best spirit of the law sometimes versus just letter of the law, like, the holistic, like, what do you think you can prove the best? Sometimes you want to take charges that have the least trauma for the victim. So you don't want the victim to have to testify. So you might convict the human trafficker on money laundering or on robbery or something and not trafficking, just so you don't have to traumatize.
Wow, I guess I didn't think about that. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so sometimes stats are really tough because sometimes you don't prosecute under the things that did actually happen. I mean, you always do, but like sometimes a trafficker might not be prosecuted as human trafficking, and the stats can be really broad. So like most people wouldn't think a teenager having sex for weed would be trafficking, but it is. Now, having said that, we do tend to focus on commercial sex with a third party. So like if there's a pimp trafficking a child, that's what we tend to focus on for human trafficking. So that's going to be any person under the age of 18 that is in the commercial sex industry. Usually they have a pimp. And so whether they're being posted online or they are walking the streets or they're being advertised on Instagram or Snapchat. I mean, there's so many venues for it. And they have it for money, sometimes for drugs, but often for money. And then they will usually give the money to their pimp or their trafficker. They almost always consider their trafficker to be their boyfriend. Which is why it's so hard to get them to outcry and why they often feel completely, I don't want to say in control, but they feel like it's their choice because
they feel like they're a part of it. Yeah,
they're trying to do it they feel like they love their boyfriend. And there's so much psychological manipulation. Most of our teenage girls that are being trafficked are runaways. And almost all of them have been sexually abused as a child. So when you're sexually abused, of course, at a very young age, it changes a little bit how your brain develops. And it's it makes them more vulnerable sometimes to traffickers. They're looking for love. They're looking for hope. They're looking for someone to belong to and a family. And so the trafficker often will come in and be like, baby, you're beautiful. I love you. We can make money. You can be rich. I know your parents don't understand you. Don't go to school. Like, choose the game. Like, come on. Like, let's get with it. So then they'll run away, and they will stay with the trafficker, and it almost always turns violent. So then they're like, well, now if you don't give me the money, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to take all your money. You'll
That
never.
sounds like domestic violence, or situations. I was in one myself, and this sounds the same way where, there's so many different levels to it, but it is psychological and you do have a fear there. It's real, and I want to touch on something real quick, and I want you to get back to this part of the myth, but you don't have to admit to this, but I know for a fact, because of my passion behind it, it would be so hard for me to be a police officer when it came to this, because I would be trying to add everything on, because it's just so disgusting to me to be a predator. But one thing I had to do, Officer Hannah, and this is just in just being real with dealing with families and things, because I've dealt with some families that oh, I love it. You can still hear me. I've dealt with some families that the parents, when working with the children, were disgusting to me in regards to things they did to their children, right? So I had to seriously try to search for the human in them, right? And I watch all these different, shows about reality of what happened to different serial killers or whatever, and you always hear these tragic stories of them when they were kids, right? Yeah. So I'm like, and I always think about how we always say, when people go through hard things, if you're in a domestic violence relationship or something hard, they say, well, whatever happened to you makes you the person that you are today, right? Mm-hmm. When you like overcame it and became strong. But I also take that with the people that had hard times in life and they didn't go that direction. They went the opposite direction. It also made them who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And I just think, it would be so hard to see the human in some of these people, but I have to sometimes, but it's like it would be hard. So, I mean, I don't know. Is that hard for you?
Sometimes, I've talked to a lot of pimps over the years, and John's like the commercial sex clients. And it is sometimes hard, but everyone does have a story. And it is, and if you see the humanity in people, it does help. There's good in everyone, there's bad in everyone. We all make bad choices. But it is something to talk to the girls a lot about, that, what's been done to you and what's been said to you doesn't make you who you are, right? Like, you are still you. You're worth more than this. You're something, like, people should love you, and you're going to be okay. You're not a bad person. One of my favorite is, we have human trafficking stings or prostitution stings where undercover stuff, and the girls will come in thinking they're coming for a date, and then it's the police, and then we have nonprofits there, so we'll have the nonprofits there to talk to the girls.
Really? Okay. Wow.
And give them resources and ways out and shelter and all that stuff. And sometimes they don't want it, right? They're like, no, I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to do that. But, I really like those conversations because it's usually just me and the girl and a nonprofit worker. And we just sit on the bed, and we just kind of talk. And one thing I always remind them is, like, you're not a bad person. Like, what you are, like, if I had been in your shoes and your situation and raised in the same way, like, you're doing the very best you can. And no matter what anyone says and no matter what he did to you, and I know you don't believe me now, and I know you don't want to get myself now, and I'm a cop, and, like, you don't trust me, and I get it, and I wouldn't either. But someday you're going to think back on this conversation, and you're going to remember that there's a way out, and I'm proud of you. I think you're going to be okay, and someday, you'll see that. And
that's awesome that you're able to do that.
I love them, and
I would definitely be all over that. Yeah. So where are the pimps at during this situation? Because on TV they always show where the pimps are, like, downstairs waiting, or is that really realistic, where they're downstairs waiting, or where they may come up or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that sometimes is, and each trafficking or situation is a little different.
Sure.
Sometimes the pimps are right there. Sometimes they bring the girls in the car, and then if we're there, we'll try to stop the car and arrest them. Sometimes they will not be there at all. You know, a lot of the girls who are being, and there's men too, although for sex trafficking, it is a majority women.
Sure.
The girls will work, and their pimp might even be out of state. We've had many girls that work
Really?
or isn't even there. They'll send money to them, they'll wire money, and
Really?
they haven't even met their trafficker. He just controls long distance. Yeah, and it's really sad, and we talk about that, you know, with them sometimes, but it's the trauma, it's the trauma they go through, the threats that they go through, the trauma bonding, the just that's all that they feel they're able to do.
How do they meet them if they are out of, I mean, I'm just curious about that, how they're able to manipulate.
Yeah, online, Instagram, especially for the kids. It's actually pretty interesting.
Wow.
We've done reverse stings, like some undercover stuff to get the pimps who are recruiting. And conversations with them are very interesting, and they will demand a lot of the teenagers right off the bat, and expect them to do it. Like, go work now. I'm going to post an ad for you tonight, even though they're living in a different state. You're going to have someone call your phone, and I want you to work tonight out of your home.
How scary. Oh my goodness. That breaks my heart. Oh.
And it's sad because the girls, you know, they believe, like, you always want to have hope, right? Like, you always want to feel like you're in some sort of control, that they're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be better. I'm going to make money. This is my break. This is whatever it is. And they want to hold on to some sort of, you know, control or hope that this guy is a good guy and he's a boyfriend and he's going to be their ticket out. And then they just get further in. And as soon as they get more connected, the pimps usually get pretty violent. And as a teenager, right? You know, think of the teenagers being hard. Anyway, you know, it's hard to think straight as a teenager, and much less like try to put all this together of what's going on in manipulation. And so,
well, and it depends on their household too, right? I mean, I mean, if you are having your stepdad, and I'm just using a you know, fake scenario, but if you have your stepdad beating you or violating you at home, or, you know, mom is beating you, I mean, you may think this is my way to a better life, you know, and what can be worse than this, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So you know, we've recovered runaways or recovered traffic victims. I never use the word rescue. They're not happy to see us usually at all. I've been spit on, kicked, hit.
Oh, wow.
We had some kids, some girls that were being trafficked jump out of a third-story window to get away from us, and they ran down the street to their trafficker who was waiting for them and to get away.
Oh, wow.
So it's that we've had many girls we've recovered, and they run back to their trafficker the next night because you can't lock them up, right? Because they're victims. And so you put them in shelter, foster care, back home, and they'll run away within 24 hours.
Oh, wow. So we talked about victims will be desperate to leave their trafficker and ask for help when they need it. That sounds like that's a myth. So what about victims must be held against their will using some form of physical restraint or bondage? Because of course that's how they paint this picture, right? Where it's always these women down in the basement, chained up, you know. I mean, which that does happen, but I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, so that's a pretty common myth, again, that victims are kidnapped and physically held against their will. I would still argue that they are still, of course, being held against their will, but it's a much more of a psychological slavery instead of a physical one. And in some ways, I think psychological slavery is much harder to break out of. You know, anyone who's had to work in their life to overcome, whether it's some sort of religion or brainwashing or whatever you want to call it in your life, or even just lies you believed as a child. And as an adult, if you try to do that, like how many years that can take for you to kind of work through all that. Now think of as a teenager or someone who's been broken so many times, like they tend to be really, really enslaved by the psychological manipulation and trauma that the traffickers put on them. So yeah, it's very rare that they are locked in. Again, we've had many of our victims, the pimp isn't even in the hotel while they're working. They just collect all the money and give it to him when they see him next.
Wow.
And so if you think about it, like traffickers, they don't generally kidnap their victims, because what does a trafficker want? He usually wants money, right?
Right.
So who is going to be the best kind of person to bring him money? It's going to be someone who he doesn't have to babysit all the time, who's going to be working for him, what they might call on automatic, that they're constantly working, and that they're going to give him the money no matter where they are in the US. They're going to wire him the money, and they're not going to ask for help. They're not going to cooperate with the police, and they're not going to get him in trouble. Well, that's perfect. That's the perfect victim to have to make you money. What if you kidnap someone, like a true stranger abduction, which are extremely rare? I actually worked in our major case unit for a while, where we do all the abductions in Fort Worth. And we had, I think, one true stranger abduction in the 4 years that I was been over there. And so stranger abductions, unfortunately, are usually younger women or children, younger children, that for the purposes of sexual assault and then homicide. Is the most common for a true stranger abduction.
So you're saying that's not that common as people, as because it's always reported as if it is, that because I know for was this last year or the beginning of this year? This year has been so crazy. I can't even tell what time. Yes, but that's okay.
I try to keep them on.
No, it's okay. I used to work in an office like that, so I get it. I used to have to do like this and all kind of. But I can't remember when it was. If it was this year or last year, but I remember there was a short period of time for a couple months where it was this fear of people grabbing people in Myers parking lot and people doing, it was all this stuff. So, and you're saying that it happens, but not nearly as common as sometimes the media portrays it.
No, true stranger abductions, right, where someone completely has no connection to a victim and just sees them one day and just abducts them, is very rare. It does happen. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but it does happen. A lot of abductions that come out on like Amber Alerts, for example, are runaways that have met someone online, like even a trafficker, and it gets. They've seen them, they've got a license plate, because there's a lot of requirements actually for an Amber Alert. Another real common that you see for abductions is familial or child custody abductions.
Sure.
So someone that doesn't have custody of the child has kidnapped or taken the child. Now, I'm not going to say that's not very dangerous also, because unfortunately a lot of times that does end up in the child's death. So it's not that it's not dangerous, but true stranger abductions are quite rare in themselves. And I have actually never heard of one for trafficking in the United States.
Really?
No. And I've asked around other investigators that have even many, many more years than I do. And so far I haven't really come across any of a true stranger abduction into trafficking. There was one abduction that we had in a case, but it was a trafficker who had already known, it was already a previous victim of his, and she'd left him, and he actually went and kidnapped her to bring her back. But they already knew each other.
So you're saying the ones that they meet online are not considered stranger abductions because they've met sort of online? Not
quite. And there's, of course, you can argue that either way, but in the sense that they had a previous online relationship and they agreed to go with them, like, hey, meet me at the corner of such and such and all.
Right. But you're saying the guy in the van that's driving down the street and grabs somebody off the street is not as common as they portray it to be.
It's not as common as you think. It does still happen. I don't want people to not be like aware of their surroundings and all of that stuff.
Of course.
For the purposes of human trafficking, it's quite rare, largely just because it's not good for trafficking. Like, why, when there are so many girls out there and so many victims and runaways that are already missing, nobody's looking for them if they're already missing. Perfect. There's no law enforcement response, to an abduction, to any abduction. Even an abduction we don't think actually happened, that it was maybe made up or something like that. We still have a massive police response, and we'll get the feds involved. Other police departments. They'll call us out, they'll call us up, wake us up, we go into work, and there's a huge law enforcement response that we don't stop until we find the child. Well, that's terrible for a trafficker. Like, how are they going to make any money? Like, well, no, that's just not how it works for them.
That makes sense. And if, like you said, if it's someone that nobody's even looking for, that's really easy to get away with that. Wow. Wow. Okay. I appreciate this because it's a lot of things that, I mean, of course, quite naturally, the media, and I'm not saying that in the bad or good. I'm just saying in general, the picture that has been painted is totally different. So this is really good information. And again, we want to preface this with, we are not saying that it does not happen. It's just not as common as people think. So I wanted to ask you about this. Trafficking requires some form of transportation or travel across borders. What's the myth behind that?
Yeah, so that's really common. That's when trafficking gets mixed up with smuggling. So so smuggling again is the transportation across the border illegally, but trafficking doesn't require any movement at all. Again, it's just forced fraud or coercion, or again a child that is in the commercial sex or forced labor industry, and it can be done from their home. You can be trafficked right out of your own home. You can traffic by never leaving your home. There's no transportation needed anywhere in the penal code and the offense for human trafficking.
Okay. So what about this one here? This myth: if someone is paid or consented to be in their initial situation, it isn't trafficking. So if they say, as I think you talked about a little bit earlier, if they say, "Hey, I want to come with you. Hey, I want to do this," some people say, "Well, they voluntarily went."
Right. So yeah, I mean, and I've heard this before too. Now for kids, again, in sex trafficking, it's a non-issue, right? Because kids can't consent. And so whether they did or they didn't consent, it doesn't matter. That has no bearing on whether or not they were trafficked. And for adults, it doesn't change my mind at all. Some people will disagree with me on that. And I've had discussions with people on that. But in my scene of it, we all make mistakes, right? We're all humans. And so maybe there is something that you thought you wanted and now you don't. And as a human, you should never be forced into anything you don't want to do, especially in labor or especially in the sex industry.
Which is true. Yeah.
Right. So if maybe you were paid to be there, but that doesn't mean you wanted to. And it doesn't mean if you initially consented, you had the whole story and that you actually wanted to be there at all.
Yeah. So
many I don't like the term prostitute, but so many of the sex workers that I've talked to, they were trafficked as a kid. And so, like, is it really a choice for them anymore? I mean, at some point, yeah, you're an adult, but like, you were trafficked. Like,
if you don't understand the mind games that goes along with that after years and years and years of being told a certain thing, and not to mention your whole environment, your whole surroundings being this, you know, this is all you know of since you were a child.
If you have conditioned, of course, we know about the term learned helplessness. If you're conditioned into learned helplessness, especially as a child, if you're being trafficked as a child or as a teenager, now in Texas, the child is under the age of 18. In other states, it's under 21. So there's some state that, let's say you were trafficked from the age of 17 to 21, you've had that trauma, you've had learned helplessness, you have PTSD, you've got anxiety, depression, you're hooked on drugs now. Is that really your place anymore where you're at? Like, I would argue that it isn't.
Right.
And almost all of the women I've talked to, almost all of them, and the ones that didn't, I don't know that they might have been telling the truth, but the vast majority of them that I've talked to, I've asked them, like, if you could do anything with your life, like what do you want to do? Do you want to do this? Like, I'm not going to judge you if you do. Like, I'm not here to judge you, but out of curiosity, like, what do you want to do? Like, would you do this if you had anything in the world else you could do? And they're always like, no, of course not. They're like, I'm here for my kids. I don't have any way of feeding my kids. Like, I don't have an ID. I don't have transportation. I've got 5 kids or whatever. The fathers are not around. Like, how do I feed my kids? And they'll even ask me, they're like, how do I do it? Like, how do I feed 5 children with no transportation and no college degree, no high school diploma on, $8 an hour? And then how do I pay my rent and all that? And I don't have an answer for them. Like, so is that really a choice at that point? Like, so I'm kind of on a tangent now. I'm kind of passionate about that part.
No, go for it. Yeah, I am too. So I appreciate this.
Yeah. And that's why we work really hard in our police department, and it's getting more common in other departments too. To every single person that we believe is a victim of trafficking, or we even think might be a victim of trafficking, they each get a personal civilian advocate. So if they decide, and it's not Fort Worth, it's not the city, it's not CPS, it's not anyone, they're separate nonprofits. that have trained full-time advocates that are specifically trained to be advocates for human trafficking victims. And they come to our office, they come to stings, they come to recoveries, they come to wherever we are 24 hours a day. And they're there for the victim. And especially as an adult, so adults don't have to work with us, right? Like they're victims and they're adults. So they can tell us to go pound sand and they don't want to cooperate, and that's okay. Like that's their right. But what's most important, like the case is not the most important thing. Like the most important thing is that the victims and the survivors like get resources for help. Like the person is the most important thing, not the case. And so we always have advocates there, because if they don't want to talk to us, I get it. I'm a cop. Like nobody wants to talk to me. But like, there's advocates there that will be there for them for the rest of their lives. Like if they want it, they'll be there. They help them with housing, with education, with clothes, getting cell phones, getting out of state, moving, pet care, child care, someone to just talk to. They go to coffee.
I love that.
Baby showers, college graduations. Like they are there for them. And it's been one of the best things we've ever done here, and a lot of departments are doing it now. And it's been really helpful to reduce the recidivism of our survivors going back, and it's really helped to give them more options.
That's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. It's like, if you tell me I can get out but have no plan.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's like, that's counterproductive.
Yeah, like, what am I going to do? Call business card? Like, I'm not going to do, like, they're not going to do it. Like, you have to make it so easy. And it's not their fault that they're not going to do it. Like, if I was in that situation, I probably wouldn't do it either. And there's so many people that have given them so many promises over the years, including their pimp, that have not come through. And so we have to prove to them in other more tangible ways, here's dinner. Like we feed them, or the advocates bring them food. Here's clothes, here's a book, like here is, an advocate, here's a lawyer, here's a place to stay, here's dog food, your pet, like here's whatever you need. And someday you'll remember this, like we're on your side, even though I know you don't think we are.
I think that's beautiful. I love it. I love that, because I'm a firm believer that if you tell someone to get out of something, you should have a plan for them. You should help them with that and not just leave them to their own devices, because obviously they don't know or they wouldn't be where they are. So my next question is, this is a myth also, that only women and children experience trafficking. So can you speak on that?
Yeah, exactly. That's not true at all. Men tend to be a little bit larger proportion of labor trafficking. So both men and women, of course, are labor trafficked. And I don't think anyone argues that point. I think what people don't think of is men being sex trafficked, which absolutely happens. So we've had 2 cases. Now, again, we don't have as many cases with men.
Sure.
We did have 2 cases this year, 2 very good sex trafficking. I don't say good, but 2.
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
2 solid sex trafficking cases of men. One was a juvenile, a homeless juvenile boy who was trafficked on the streets. And then another was an adult male who was trafficked more in the pornography industry. And so, And so they absolutely are trafficked. Some of the difficulty with boys in trafficking is, for one, girls are unlikely to outcry, and that's even more for boys. It's kind of like men in domestic violence. It's very underreported. And it's the same thing, because domestic violence and human trafficking are like hand in hand, because of course they usually believe their trafficker is a boyfriend or a girlfriend or, something like that. Yeah. And so the boys are very unlikely to outcry, and a lot of people don't think of it. They're looking for girls more, and law enforcement tends to be looking for girls, when we really need to be more open to looking for boys. Also, the LGBTQ community. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
A little, I'm gonna say more closed off, but a little more suspicious sometimes of law enforcement too, because we haven't done a very good job of building relationships with that community. And that's something that I have been trying to do more as well. And I've done some teaching with them, and that look like, we're not going to judge you. Like you're just as wonderful and valuable. You're
a person. Yes. You're a person.
Amazing. And so we've had many many victims that are in the LGBTQ community, and we feel for them as well, because a lot of them are vulnerable because of what they've been through, whether it's bullying or being rejected by their family, or anything like that. And so they're less likely to trust because they've been hurt, and I wouldn't trust either, if I was them.
Yeah.
So it's very understandable, and so they're just much less likely to outcry. But it absolutely does happen to boys, and I hope we continue to get more cases, because what I always say, and especially when I teach like patrol officers, is like, I hope our stats go up every single year, because there's more trafficking out there than we're catching, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
because your stats are going up doesn't mean it's going up. It means you're catching more of what's already there. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And so
Right.
I hope our stats continue to go up, because that means we're continuing to find more and help more victims. And I really hope that our boys' cases go up, because I know there's more out of them than.
Yeah. We as a society have not been very kind to boys and men in regards to domestic violence, in regards to this conversation either, and it's just so interesting, because oftentimes when men or boys come forward with their pains, as a society, we kind of laugh at them and we joke about it, or people applaud, like, oh, you almost like, they earn some stripes by doing certain things, when it was abuse, just like it is for girls. So I have a problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No one deserves to feel like that. I don't care who.
No.
I don't care how.
We have to do better.
I agree.
We have to make it more safe for them to come forward, because I think a lot of times, well, I know for a fact, it's a lot of men that I've spoke to that I have wanted to talk to, and this is before even doing this. This is just because I've always been very passionate about this, and I wanted them to kind of come forward with their story in regards to getting help, and they won't, because they're afraid of they're more afraid of being ridiculed by society than they are afraid about what's happening to them, which is heartbreaking. But we've created that environment in the society.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. So my next question for you is, can human trafficking also include forced marriage and organ trafficking? And I think you touched on that at first, but you said that's more international?
So there's something called the Palermo Protocol, which is like sort of the international guide for like human trafficking offenses.
Sure.
And they included forced marriage and organ trafficking underneath their definition of human trafficking.
Okay.
I have to look at our penal code a little closer to see, because I actually haven't dealt with either of those here. And I was under what we would put that as an offense here. But that is included in trafficking overseas, and some of the stats that the State Department puts out for human trafficking.
Okay, and I know you said you don't deal with international, but the reason why I wanted to know that is because for years, especially in the Black and brown communities, there's been bodies discovered. I mean, and it's made national news. I mean, it's, been documented. There's been bodies discovered with organs missing.
Sure.
So, excuse me. So with that said, is that not a part of it, or is it not investigated, or what does that fall under?
It's possible. I can't really speak to that. I don't really know what was or wasn't going on. The little that I know there was possibly, I've heard of organ trafficking in Africa as well as in the Middle East, of children in organ trafficking there. But I'm not up to speed on any of it. I couldn't speak to it, but it would be very interesting to know for sure, because it's some of those things that we don't really think about all the time. And I think the more our perspective is broadened, the better we can do as a society.
Yeah, because I mean, that's been a topic, especially, like I said, discussed in Black and brown communities for years, because bodies kept, especially of children, being discovered. I mean, of course, they never showed us the bodies, but this was something that's been discussed in the media again. That bodies are being discovered without, and I think especially what was the young man's name that was found wrapped in a mat in his school building that made like national news. He was found dead and his organs were missing, and it's like, how did all that happen within the school and nobody? So the cameras were off and all that stuff. So, but that's something that's just very interesting to me, and I wonder what's behind all of that. So
yeah, it could be that. Unfortunately, without going into graphic detail, there's very strange, creepy people in the world that are sometimes obsessed with that kind of thing, or taking human body parts and whatever. And it's not necessarily trafficking. It's just very disturbing.
well, people do it with ritualistic stuff. People do it with, some people like to eat that stuff. I mean, that's just a reality. It's oh, you can say it. Oh yeah, I'm an open book. So
there's more there than a person might think.
yeah.
And it's actually one of my friends was actually doing a study on it, of all things. But it's there is that out there too. So yeah, there's certainly sort of a underground of people that you don't always know, and it's not always trafficking, but it's certainly something. And
sure, something, yeah, very interesting. So okay, so my other question for you is, do parents assist in trafficking a lot? Because like you said, the stranger one is not as common as people think. So then I wonder, can parents do it? Because I know there's parents that are on drugs, or parents that, you just have some parents that don't really care about their children, and they will allow people to do things to their children for money or whatever. So is that considered trafficking as well?
100% trafficking. It doesn't. You get no exception if you're the child's parent, and if anything, of course, I think it makes it even worse.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, we do have parents, unfortunately, who traffic their children. It's not quite as common.
Okay.
It's not like we're seeing it nonstop, but it does certainly happen. We've had several cases of mothers, especially mothers and fathers, trafficking their kids, or the mothers or parents accepting money from the child that they knew was from a commercial sex act.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
they did not set it up, but they knew it was happening and they didn't stop it, and then they accepted the money. So we've seen that a few times, but yeah, we have seen parents who traffic their kids, often for drugs. So they'll let the drug dealer sleep with their child or something in exchange for drugs. That's often where you see the younger children. So our kids, when they're trafficked, usually are like 14 to 17 is the most common, although we've had several 12-year-olds in the past few years. But that's generally the age range that we're looking at. Sometimes they are younger, and if they're younger than that, if they're maybe under the age of 12, it is often the parents that are involved, because obviously they're very, very young. Like as a teenager, sometimes they really look like adults. Like it's amazing how old some of them look sometimes. But when you're under that very, very young, under 12, of course you don't look like an adult. And so it's something that they keep much more hidden, so that it doesn't get reported to law enforcement, because even commercial sex clients won't go for little kids. They're like, nope, like I'm gonna call the police anonymously or something like that. And so when it's very young children, it's a little more common to be parents, and then they might be trafficked sort of word of mouth, like to my drug dealer, to my cousin, or to somebody I know. And so they're a little bit harder to find. Like as police, of course, we're not omniscient, right? We don't know everything that's going on. A lot of our tips have come to us through patrol or through concerned citizens or the hotline or whatever. And so if it's very, very hidden, it is harder. We don't know that's going on. So, that's harder for us to find. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does, and we've had cases on it.
Sure.
And I wish we knew more. And it's something that I've kind of thought about. Like one thing I think that is lacking in law enforcement is we do a lot of proactive operations into drugs, for example, or guns or smuggling or whatever. But we do less as a law enforcement community of proactive operations into human trafficking. So that's one thing that's kind of a passion of mine. And I'm really honored to be able to work with the federal government. So Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security does a ton of work in anti-human trafficking. It's the largest federal agency that works in trafficking. They work the most trafficking cases of any federal agency. And a big push for trafficking and proactive related trafficking operations. So we're doing a lot of that here in the DFW area, is trying to brainstorm and think of ways we can be better because like they're not coming to us, right?
Yeah.
So we need to go to them. And of course, the ideal is to find these traffickers before they victimize people. And so if we can find a better case, and if we can base it off of our proactive work and not have to have a victim testify, that's even better because then they're less traumatized. So I don't know how I got on that tangent, but anyway, populations to find the younger kids because it absolutely happens. Yeah.
Okay. Now I just want to ask your opinion on something, and I'm gonna let you go here in a second because this I could talk about this.
Oh, one of my court classes is 8 hours. So
oh yeah. Okay. There's a lot of people now that, and this is kind of in your field a little bit, but there's a lot of civilians, using your language, that are doing their own sting operations. What is your advice in that? There's a lot of people, you see these videos of people doing the undercover where they reach out to somebody they think is doing, trying to be with a child, sexually, and they are catching them, on film. They go and meet them at these places. What's your advice on that? Because for me, it's a little dangerous at times, but I get their passion. So what do you think about that?
And obviously I'm glad that people care about that kind of stuff. And it can be frustrating if they feel like law enforcement isn't doing enough. We're not to be political or anything right now, but a lot of departments are understaffed and undermanned, and we only have a few people in our unit. And so it is hard to keep up with everything. And so they might get frustrated feeling like we're not, doing enough. Sure. And so I do certainly value and applaud their passion for that. But I would generally advise against it. It is dangerous and you never know what you're going into. And also it's, if you want to get them prosecuted and for court and for trial, like none of that's going to be able to be used. And
really,
it's not going to probably go anywhere. It'll probably get thrown out. And so as far as the cases go, not only is it dangerous, and I wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, and it could hurt evidence, it could hurt a case. But if you know something that's going on, obviously it needs to get reported. And if you don't feel like you're getting a good response from your local law enforcement, you can always talk to the feds or the attorney general's office or Homeland Security or your sheriff's office, or put pressure on other ways, because I would never want anyone to continue to be hurting anyone. Like that should never happen. But go out and go do it on your own. That's not. It's not the best idea. And I get the passion. Like I was in a nonprofit, right? And I didn't feel like I could do what I wanted. I wanted to go out and get them. And so
honey, I could tell you so many stories working with kids, how many times I wanted to put them in my car and keep driving and not take them back home. So I get it.
And that's why I became a cop. I was like, I know what I want to do, and the only way I can do it safely and legally, because you can't go and be taking kids out of that situation. That's called
right? Even though you want to, I know it's like my intentions are good.
Yeah, and you're going to get in trouble. And of course, you don't need to get in trouble. You're just trying to help people. And so,
right.
But a good thing is to make relationships with your local law enforcement, with the police. And it's hard if you just call 911 and like you feel like nothing happened, right? You don't know what happened. But if you can actually make real relationships and have the email or the phone number of someone in your area that you trust and is going to get something done, like that's one of the best ways to do it. And so I would encourage people to know who the people are in your area who work human trafficking. And maybe it's not the locals, maybe it's only the federal agency, because a lot of departments don't have human trafficking units. But
really? I didn't know that. Okay.
It's quite rare. Most human trafficking is worked by like a sex crimes or a child abuse unit. If it's worked at all, there's actually a lot of misinformation and lack of training even among law enforcement for human trafficking. And so, and that's something, of course, we can always try to do better in. But we have so much time in the day. But I do a lot. Part of my job in my unit is to train and to do things like this and to do webinars and to speak and teach. And I teach a lot of law enforcement classes on human trafficking, and what patrol can do to find trafficked victims better and how to make cases better and stuff like that.
Awesome. I think that's great. I really applaud you guys for doing it, because I know, like I said, just working with children, the stories that I heard and things that they would share would break my heart. So I couldn't imagine actually being in that type of situation. And you have to go by the law. So a certain different processes you have to go through. And
Yeah,
sometimes
it's aggravating sometimes how slow and how many rules and loopholes. I know people get frustrated, and it's like, man, like we have so many rules and that we have to follow, you know, for any case, but it's good.
And those people have rights too. And that's the part that's like tricky. It's like, you know, we can't say we have rights and they don't have rights. And so it gets tricky because they do have rights, but you don't want them to have rights.
You gotta respect everyone. You've got to do it right. You've got to
yeah.
So it takes us a little while sometimes to do things, but you know, we do the best we can to make sure it all goes well. So.
Yeah, wow. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Officer Hannah. I really appreciate you for coming on. It's just been really nice. And like I said, this is just really informative for me and hopefully for others, because there is so much misinformation or things that are being glamorized or, you know, kind of over, kind of overshared or over represented. And so, you know, people think that, oh my goodness, this is going on. Really, you know, it could be, you know, the uncle right next, you know what I mean? It could be a lot more closer to you than you think. And we're not looking for them. We're looking for the guy in the white van.
You know, it's tough because some people are, I don't want to say disappointed, you know, it's not like, but it's like, it's not as glamorous. It's not as exciting. But I don't want to know what I think it should be. I want to know what it is, because it's still bad. And the children are still being traumatized and sexually assaulted many, many times a night. And it needs to stop. But the only way you're going to see it and you're going to find those victims is if you know what it really is.
That's true.
So, they need help. There's so many of them out there. It's true when people say that there's so many victims of trafficking. It's 100% true. It just doesn't always look like, you know, what you think.
That's fine. They can continue to watch Law and Order like I do, and you know, live through that, whatever you need to do. But you know, we applaud you and, you know, people like you that do what you do, because it's amazing. And you know, especially for children and people who feel like they have nowhere else to go, they need that help. And I really love the advocacy part that you guys added into it. That's
Yeah, it was something that actually the governor, Governor Abbott here in Texas, he wanted law enforcement agencies to do here. And so a lot of us have picked it up, and we added on the advocates for adults. We didn't have to do that, but we decided to do that. And I really hope more agencies pick it up, because it is wonderful. I love the advocates. Like, I love them. Like, they're great. They help us so much. They help our cases. They help but most of course, they help the kids and the victims.
Well, and they're not police officers. So I think, you know, for the women or men and children, whoever see them may feel a little bit safer or trust them a little bit quicker sometimes. I don't know, you know, when they aren't, you know, this official looking person, and they kind of, so that's awesome. That's awesome.
And they're 100% there for them. They're not doing a case. They're not doing anything. Like, they're just there for them.
No, I think that's amazing. Well, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your sacrifice for making sure we got this done today and rushing over to the office, getting a laptop and all of that.
I wish I could have been here a little sooner, but
no, it's okay. Everything happens in due time. It's all good. So I appreciate you, and I wish you a great night. And we will definitely keep in touch. And and my family's down in Texas, so when I go down to visit them, I have to look you up.
Or something. I would love that. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, you have a great night, and I'm gonna let you go before the lights go back off.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Bye bye. Well, awesome. Thank you. Well, better late than never. I'm so happy that Officer Hannah was able to come on. This was really good. Shared a lot of information and enlightened me in a lot of ways in regards to what really is going on. So I appreciate her. And of course, anybody else that does that, anybody that does advocacy work is awesome. So thank you so much again. And I appreciate you guys. You guys have a great evening. Thank you.